Hello, HubSpot professionals. I'm Christian Bond, founder of Howley.io, and I came across a post recently on Reddit asking about SOPs or workflow documentation. So the poster here is asking, has anyone used a tool that helps capture all workflow documentation from their HubSpot portal? We're scaling our team, and there has to be an easier way to document our existing framework of properties, syncs, and automations. And I totally agree, and that's what I want to talk about today. There's a couple of ways to do this right out of the box natively in HubSpot. And so if I go to my workflows in HubSpot here, I can see that I have 75. And one thing I can do is I can click into each individual workflow. And in the trigger, in the enrollment piece of the workflow, I can see that there is an internal note box. What's great here, right, is you can use this functionality to create an internal note. Perhaps it's a workflow in progress, or perhaps this is something that needs to be archived, or it's a workflow that was built a while ago that hasn't been turned on. This is your opportunity, right, to tag the person responsible, or turn it on, or make these notes. But while this is extremely powerful in and of itself, one thing that HubSpot doesn't show, unfortunately, is how these workflows are all connected in one, either through properties or stages or enrollment into other workflows. And so that's where a tool like Howley becomes pretty important here. So what I want to show today is how Howley allows you and your team to create notes and documentations directly on the workflow, and everybody gets full visibility into these workflows. So we are back in Howley just now, and I've connected to my HubSpot portal. We can see that there are 75 total workflows, and in Howley they're broken into contact and deal and company and ticket, and I believe there's a few lead workflows as well. What's interesting, right, is as we're talking about connections and as we're talking about how workflows are flowing into one another, we can really quickly take a look at something like the Status MQL workflow here, which has a few connections. Immediately we can see that this workflow starts the MQL welcome and sales follow-up workflow. It also starts a few workflows pending that their lifecycle stage changes to MQL. There's also a few here that are just off. And so what Howley does is it surfaces all of the connections for you, and that allows you to see how your workflows are connected. And we can see from clicking the Status MQL contact workflow that there are two workflows that, if they were on, they would start because they're started by this workflow. So that's the downstream impact. But right off the gate, we can, if we go back to our map here, this is an opportunity to create a few notes around these workflows specifically. I just clicked on this workflow again, and we can see that there are lots of connections to other workflows. But in this case, what I want to do is, as I'm clicking on this particular workflow, it opens up the sidebar in Howley to not only give you information about what the workflow does, the actions associated with it, and the workflow connections, either what it is started by or what it starts. But in this case, because we clicked on the Set as MQL workflow, we can see that there are two connections to two inactive workflows as part of this sequence. And so this is, as I'm creating SOPs and documentation, I want to make a note here and say this workflow can be removed. And we can make this a high priority. We can even be more descriptive. We can say this workflow can be removed because it is no longer needed. What happens after I type in these notes? I click on Save Note here, and I'm just going to copy and paste this note onto the other workflow as well, mark that as high, and then right off the gate, if I click back on the Set as MQL workflow, we can see that there are now two indicators here that there are some high risk notes associated with these workflows, and I can see those as I'm hovering over. So while the HubSpot internal notes are really awesome for creating notes for your team or you're turning something on, what Howley gives you is that 10,000 foot view of where you can see all of your workflows at one time together with all of these notes. And okay, so we can see I've added 2 notes here and I'm hovering over so we can see, these workflows can be removed because they're no longer needed. Let's go through the portal a little bit more here to see if there's anything else that we can do. I can also see that, I use the Status MQL example, but if I check, for example, the re-engagement educational nurture, we can see that, okay, there is another inactive workflow that this workflow is started by. So what does this mean? If I click on the re-engagement for inactive leads, we can see that this workflow starts the re-engagement nurture called educational. And so this sends 2 educational emails to contacts added to the re-engagement list with a 7-day delay between sends. And the enrollment are it's a list enrollment here. So when they are in this list called re-engagement list, this workflow will fire. But I want to take a look at this workflow. So what this workflow does is it actually adds contacts to a list called re-engagement list. Now, right off the gate as well, we can make a note here and say that this workflow, the re-engagement educational workflow, it's on, right? But it's not actually enrolling any contacts because the workflow that it is started by is inactive. So what I want to do here is I want to create a note here and say this workflow is on, but it doesn't enroll anyone since the workflow that starts it is off. And this to me is a high priority, high risk. So I'm going to add that note here, and I can then look at the workflow that it is started by, which is the adding to the re-engagement list. And I can say, review this workflow to see if it should be turned on. And again, this is a high risk workflow to me, and I want to save that note. And now as I'm working through all of my workflows, I can simply hover over the workflows that I've added notes for, and these are showing up automatically. And if you and your team are in Howley, using Howley in your day-to-day to run all of your automations, this becomes extremely important, right? Because not only can you see workflows that you're working on, but you can even allow your team to see all of these internal notes on this canvas map. So there's really no confusion about, well, what needs to happen and who's responsible for what. There are a few other workflows, right? Like the pricing page follow-up, we can see that, okay, these are probably good to keep and there's no connections. But if we want to review those, okay, this is a Q2 remote campaign. Okay, so this is an older campaign. So we can say, please review this campaign. Since it's from 2020, should it still be on? This is perhaps a medium one. I mean, I don't believe that there's any enrollment criteria. What we can do is we can open this directly in HubSpot. We can see, okay, it's a manually triggered campaign, so there's no enrollments in this one. So going back to the note here, we can add this as a medium note, and now it's added here. So when I hover over this workflow, okay, somebody is going to review this since it's from 2020, should it still be on? And so that is how I go through a HubSpot portal and I audit and I look at, well, HubSpot out of the box, right? We can create some good documentation and internal notes, but as far as connections goes and as far as looking at the entire picture on one canvas, that is where Howley really becomes a necessity, right? There's also, deal workflows here that may be connected to others. Okay, so there's I just clicked on deals right here in this portal, and we can see that it sets the deal stage to closed won. And then it sets the lifecycle stage of the contact to customer. What's interesting, right, is that just by clicking on this, I can see that there are 3 connections, 3 contact workflows connections. And what it does here is, okay, it sets the lifecycle stage and then it sends an internal notification. That's about it. But then if we're looking at the workflows that it start, we can click into these ones. We can see there are a lot of connections here too. So that's fine. So let's look at this one. So, okay, this one creates a task for an internal task to update the billing record. That's probably fine to leave. We have another one here to remove from all lists. That's a task. Perhaps the note here could be, should this be a task or an automation? Please review. And I'm not sure this is, extremely high priority. We can mark that as low for now. And then let's review the final workflow that this was associated with. Okay, so when lifecycle stage is any of customer, we set an email campaign, create a task to schedule a kickoff call, and then we add them to a list called active customers. Okay, actually this is looking pretty good. One thing that I might want to flag when reviewing this one in particular is we send an email campaign here. That's the very first step. And then we add them to a list called active customers, which is right here. And we can see the connections is via active customers, that list. And this workflow, what it does is, of course, it's started by this workflow we were just on. And then it sends email campaigns, and there are a few more actions here. And if I click into, I can see, okay, we send educational content, etc. One thing I might want to have a look at then is, should this email, or should this workflow send an email as a first step, since the other workflow does, or includes a nurture program. This perhaps could be a medium risk for me, and I'm going to save that. All right, so I have now created 6-7 notes here, and as the next step, what I want to do is look at my entire report that I have now started to create. And I do that by clicking on the health checker. This is also where you see the health of all of your workflows, looking at things like broken enrollments, duplicate actions, stale workflows, things like that. Again, this is another opportunity, right, to click through, okay, so these haven't been updated in the past 14 months. If I click into that, it takes me to that workflow directly, and I can say, okay, please review. This workflow hasn't been updated since 2025. Because I don't know the risk associated with this, I'll just put it as low for now. Some of these legacy workflows, I mean, they were created and they still work. So whether or not they need to be updated or optimized, it's certainly up to the business objective. But I'm going to say, please review. This workflow hasn't been updated since 2025. I'm going to save that note. And again, right, it's added the indicator here that it's a low risk workflow. But again, we want to review this. As I am now going through the workflows again, what I want to see is I want to see all of my documentation that not only I've created manually through these notes, but certainly also how my workflows are behaving and what else I can see. And I do this by clicking on the health checker and then downloading the report. The report here is really important, right? Because it gives you the overall portal health score. It shows you the number of workflows. It shows you a summary and some top priorities. And as I'm scrolling down further into the report, we can see, okay, these are all of my issues. We have some standalone workflows or possible duplicates, things like that. We also show you the entire workflow inventory. This is really important for your SOP because you can see what's active, or versus inactive. You can see the object type. So a contact workflow, you can see the number of actions associated with that. And it is filtered by the newest workflow on top. So we have workflows here that were last updated on June 30th. As I scroll further down into the report, that is where we get to the SOP and documentation piece, which here, right, we have 75 total workflows. And okay, I actually updated 9 workflows here. That's pretty cool. So we see that 9 of the 75 workflows that we have been documented manually by us. And 4 of these workflows have been flagged as high risk. And that's what we did when we put the risk level on there. And then we can also see that there are 66 undocumented workflows. So whether or not you're working directly in Howley, and you can hover over the notes here, and your team has access to it, and they can see the notes that you put on these workflows. If I find them here, okay, cool. Yeah, we can see these notes here. So that's perfect. They also live in that report that you can download directly or export directly from Howley. And this is where you can see the workflow names here. We can see the risk level, and we can see the purpose or the notes that you or a teammate has left here. And what's really cool is you can take this entire report complete with your most used properties, complete with your SOP and documentation, your workflow inventory, down to the benchmarks, down to the AI insights, and run that through your favorite LLM. You can share this with your team, and that really is such a strong starting point when it comes to documenting your, all of your automations in your portal, whether it is for in-house or whether it is for clients that you're working across. What's really cool is that these notes that you are creating on the canvas are fully visible to not only yourself but also your teammates as they are logging in and using Howley. So that is how I would personally go ahead and audit and create some SOPs or workflow documentation as I'm looking through not only my connections, but also whether or not a workflow should be made redundant or removed, or if a workflow has been created and it's not live yet. There's so many different use cases for why you want to use the notes functionality in Howley, and certainly export the report